Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Patrick Ray. I'm one of the retirement specialists here at the Retirement Group and Wealth Enhancement. And today we're going to talk specifically about our AT&T folks who are in the process of transitioning into a successful retirement. And we're going to talk specifically today about how to retire on purpose with purpose. And one of our first steps is to produce you a checklist that is certainly something to consider when you're making one of the most important financial decisions that you've ever had to make. And so we talk a lot about the comfort of making the right decisions on how to elect your pension, which we're going to talk a little bit about today, and the transition of going into something that typically people only do one time, which is retire. Right. So we know that this is the second most stressful event that anyone ever has to go through. And unfortunately, number one is losing a spouse. So we don't take this transition lightly. And the things that we talk about are correlated to this checklist with respect to your emotions and your comfort of knowing that you're making the best and most informed decision for you and your family. And we're going to talk a lot about how to minimize the volatility and risk that's associated with that transition and increasing and maximizing your retirement income while paying as little tax as possible. And along the way, we will certainly develop an investment philosophy that's correlated to your long-term retirement goals and your investment objectives and need for income and tolerance for risk and all those kind of things. So first and foremost, understanding the key changes that are going to happen when you transition is first and foremost, we've got to understand your pension benefits. And we've got to do a really good job at explaining to you not only all of your options that you have, but which one makes the most sense for you and your family to consider. We're going to talk about inflation and certainly how inflation impacts this decision and the transition of moving into a successful retirement. We're going to talk about the 401k updates that are certainly relevant to most of you who have money inside the 401k plan. And we're going to do our very best to steer clear of the mistakes that we've seen people make over the years. And with over 25 years of experience in helping people transition into successful retirement, we feel like we're best suited to help you along that transition. And so typically the source of funds that people rely upon as buckets of money, if you will, to help offset the expenditures that you're going to have to enjoy a successful retirement are going to come from these four main sources: Social Security, your pension, your 401k, and then for those of you who potentially have real estate and rental income and such, that's going to certainly play a role in the big picture of things. So change number one, certainly we want to talk about understanding your pension benefits and specifically how interest rate impact your lump sum value, and then the difference between the lump sum and the annuity payment and how that transitions into a non-taxable event to you. So first and foremost, it's helpful to understand how the interest rates are have an impact on your actual lump sum. And so for those of you who do not know, when you go to retire, your ideal circumstance is to leave in the most favorable interest rate environment possible, meaning the lowest interest rate environment possible. And the reason is because the lower the interest rate, the more money you have in your pension plan. And so typically when the interest rates change by 1 percentage point, you can estimate that affects your pension lump sum in roughly 8 to 12% formula. So in other words, if the interest rates go up by 1%, you can expect your pension lump sum to decrease somewhere between 8 and 12% on average. And so it's helpful to know not only how the interest rates are calculated, but when they're calculated. And so as of November of 2025, and so those of you who do not know and are familiar with how the process works, every November is when the interest rates are set for the following calendar year. So as we stand in 2026, the rates are already established for anybody who retires in this particular calendar year. And they were established in November of 2025. And so this illustration is to show you the difference between the effective rates of 2025 versus the effective rates of anyone who retires this year in 2026. And you can see that each of the three segment rates, the first segment rate, which deals with the first 5 years of your retirement, the second segment, which deals with years 6 through 20, and then the third segment, which deals with years 21 plus, all have a lesser interest rates point than they did in the 2024 to 2025 transition. And what that simply means to you is that you can expect that if you were to retire in 2026, your values for your lump sums will have gone up because the interest rates are reduced and they're lesser than they were in the given rates of last year. And so to transition from a successful retirement perspective, we want to make sure that we do the most effective job at minimizing your taxes, which correlates to making sure that your transition is from the lump sum into an IRA rollover. Now, here at the Retirement Group and Wealth Enhancement, we manage monies at both Charles Schwab and Fidelity. So we prefer to use whichever you're most comfortable using. Obviously, Fidelity manages the plan at AT&T, and so you may be most comfortable keeping your funds at Fidelity, which is perfectly fine with us. But the bottom line is we have to establish a lump sum rollover IRA for your lump sum to actually exist so that that transition of monies from the plan to your account are not taxable to you. And the time that you pay income tax on what you take out, and to be crystal clear, everything that you take out of this pool of money from that point going forward is income taxable to you. And the only question is to what extent, and depending on what state that you live in, if state taxes are potentially applicable. So you don't pay taxes on the transaction until you actually withdraw monies. Now, part of this big transition from going and moving into a successful retirement is understanding the impacts of inflation. And inflation becomes a very big concern for certainly the need to be addressed, because in a typical environment, many fixed income investments do quite poorly in a interest rate rising environment. Now, as it typically stands, when bond prices decline, the interest rates are going up, or vice versa. So similar in nature to what the interest rates do to your lump sum, you can expect them to have an uncorrelated transition. So what we're looking to do is obviously leave in the most lowest and favorable interest rates environment possible, which pushes out the most money to you. But in turn, if while you're retired, the interest rates inflate, that will do damage to our fixed income portfolio and to our fixed income investments because they have an uncorrelated response to one another. And so this is a outlook of what the annual inflation rate has been over the last 40 plus years. And so, last 30 years or so. And the key is the impact of what the valuation of your dollar means to you in 5 and 10 and 15 and 20 years. And so when we know that we have a cost of living adjustment to concern ourselves with, one of the impacts or things that we need to consider if you're going to consider taking the annuity payment is to be sure that you understand the impact of inflation, because at AT&T, your pension does not have a cost of living adjustment. And so if we take the annuity payment, then we've got to know that in the next 5, 10, 15, and 20 years from now, that there's going to be a need to supplement the back end of your retirement from your liquid assets, meaning the other portfolios that we had talked about at the beginning, like your 401k and other investments that you have, and potentially some of the real estate that you might otherwise have. And so inflation plays a very big role into our transition into a successful retirement. Number 3, the 401k updates, the retirement contribution limits. Certainly we want to be maximizing those while we're transitioning or before we transition into a successful retirement. And we want to talk more specifically about the annual additions, the limitations. There are some special tax considerations to be aware of if you retire and leave the payroll prior to age 59 and a half. And then we want to make sure that we understand how the RMDs play a role when you turn eventually 73. And for some of you, even as late as 75, which are the new RMD rules of when you have to start forcing money out of those buckets or pools of monies. And so there are contribution limits, and certainly to the greatest degree you can, you should be saving as much money as possible in these pools so that they create the most liquidity for you when you transition into retirement. And then, of course, if you're over the age of 50, there's some special contributions that apply for what they call catch-up contributions. And then, as it turns out, there are also, based on the new Secure Act, that there's another contribution in addition to people who are in the 60 to 63-year-old age group, all of which should be taken into consideration while you're putting a plan together for retirement. And so the contributions look like as much as possible of what we can afford to put in, for sure. And for those of you who are on the higher end of compensation on the management side of things, you're going to find that potentially 415 plays a role of what you have inside your pension plan, which is for our high income earners, and the ability to make contributions that could potentially go into your after tax bucket, and then certainly transition from the after tax side of things directly into a Roth IRA. So for those of you who don't know, there are not contribution or income limitations to be able to participate in this. And so mostly what we want to do is find the folks that this potentially may apply to, and then run some numbers for them to help them understand what they could be able to put into the plan and what that transition looks like of moving those monies into an ultimate Roth IRA to grow tax-free for the rest of your life. So we talked a little bit about some of the special tax considerations and situations that you want to be aware of when you transition into retirement. And most of the importance of this is if you're beyond 59 and a half, we just want to make sure that the transition of your money from your 401k and your lump sum, assuming that you choose to take that, gets landed into your IRA at either Fidelity or Schwab, free from any taxes that you would otherwise pay. And so we'll help you with that transition, certainly, which is something that we monitor and pay attention to very, very closely. But there are some other things that allow you access to your money if you're not 59 and a half to avoid the 10% premature distribution penalties. And some of them are related to medical expenses, health insurance type things. Disability is an automatic waiver, by the way. So if you're on Social Security disability, regardless of what age you are, when you pull money out of your IRAs, it's free from any penalties. There's some inheritance rules. So if you inherit an IRA, there are no penalties related to the distributions that you're required to take on that, on those funds. As well as probably the most common thing that we run into for our AT&T folks is the rule of what they call post-55 separation, which is the ability to take money from your 401ks if you're between 55 and 59 and a half when you exit the payroll, that you can take penalty-free withdrawals from your 401k, as well as establishing something called a 72T payment, which is another word to say substantially equal payment plans, SEPP for short. And those are the consistent equal amounts of money based on amortization or annuitization schedules that the IRS has set forth to pull money from your IRAs, even though you're not 59 and a half, and not pay the penalty. So we're happy to discuss those for those of you who would apply to that rule. Certainly, we would want to make you aware of what your options are. Certainly qualified higher education expenses. So if you take money from an IRA and make those payments directly to a qualified institution, those are free from penalty, as well as some other childbirth and qualified reservist distributions, as well as adoption, things of this nature. So these are all frequent penalty-free withdrawals from your options. So this is the mandatory distribution rule. And so these are certainly applicable for those of you who would apply to the rule where your RMDs start at 73. Many of you are going to find, if you were born after 1960, that it's going to apply at age 75. And so to give you an idea, if you had a $2 million IRA and you're 73 years old under minimum distribution rules, you'll need to be removing a little north of $75,000. So for example, if you're taking $4,000 a month out of your plan, that's $48,000 a year. This is not an additional amount of money that you have to take, but it's part of the actual total distribution that you need to take. So in other words, you could remove the $48,000 that you already take for living expenses from, in this example, the $75,000, and you'd be left with about $27,000 or so that you'd have to take out in addition to what you take out to live off of to satisfy the minimum distribution rules. And the last thing that we want to talk about is steering clear of mistakes. And so we've made people aware of many, many mistakes that we've seen over the years with respect to understanding the interest rates, your pension benefits, healthcare benefits, certainly with your expenditures that you have for fees that you need to be aware of when you hire or ask someone like us to help you, because our services are obviously not free. And then if they have an investment team, what other values do they bring to the table to help you with tax planning and Social Security planning and healthcare costs and advice and those kind of things? As well as if you hadn't already had something done with a financial analysis, you need to make sure that you are running a cash flow projection, because those are mandatory, and we do those as a complimentary service to our people who are interested in taking advantage of that. Look, we know that 74% of the people over the age of 50 don't have a written financial plan, and frankly, there's no reason for that because we do it as a complimentary service for our folks. And so the retirement group has been in business for a long time. We have a ton of experience on the team. I personally have met with over 11,000 AT&T employees since 2002. So I feel like our team and our company has a great grasp on what you would experience with the things that you run into to try to make your plans and have a successful retirement set up in place. So let us know when you're ready to take advantage of the complimentary cash flow analysis that we have by emailing us at info@theretirementgroup.com or calling us at 800-900-5867. Take care.